This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. In 1967, marine biologist Roger Payne became the first person to ever record whale sounds. Whales communicate using songs, clicks, even whispers. Today, these vocal creatures are navigating some choppy waters as climate change warms their oceans and some of their food sources disappear. This hour, Where We Live is becoming Whale We Live. We'll get an update on the North Atlantic right whale living in the waters around New England, and we'll also hear about species of whales you can find at Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut, Belugas. And later, you'll meet linguist Gasper Begush, who is using AI technology to learn the language of Connecticut's state animal, the sperm whale. But first, let's talk about what we get wrong about the North Atlantic right whale. Joining me now is Eve Zukov, climate and environment reporter for CAI. Eve, welcome back to Where We Live.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
And also with us is Dr. Tracy Romano, who's the chief scientist and vice president of research at Mystic Aquarium. Tracy, appreciate you coming on the show as well.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Eve, I want to start off with you. Can you let us know what species of whales can be found off the coast of New England and where exactly are they concentrated?
Yeah, well, many whales are highly migratory species, so I can't give you anywhere necessarily that they're concentrated because they're moving all the time.
Right.
North Atlantic right whales, I got to start with them because I report on them a lot. They are the most endangered whale species in the world. There are about 370 of them. And where I'm based on Cape Cod, we see them here a lot and sometimes in insanely high aggregations. There can be 100 of them, 150 of them. It's half the population kind of in Cape Cod Bay or in the waters nearby at any given point. They basically go from Maine to Florida, though. So that's a kind of constant migration route for them. We also see humpbacks. Those are the whales that people often kind of recognize. Mm-hmm. There are many, many more humpbacks, although they are having some population struggles. We see minke whales. We see, I'm forgetting a couple. Those are kind of the three big ones that I kind of report on the most.
So the three main ones. It sounds like is that a lot happening at once?
As far as
how
many
big,
whales?
As how big the population of whales around New England.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever compared it to other places. I mean, I do think about, and I'm sure we'll get into this later this hour,
sure.
Off of Europe, for example, like there aren't necessarily in at least where the kind of offshore wind turbines are off of Europe, there aren't comparable large baleen whales that researchers can study out there. So I would have to ask one of the researchers or one of the scientists that I talk to how that compares with other places.
Well, we'll definitely get deep in waters for this conversation for sure. And can you also talk about why do we see certain types of whales in our waters? As you were just saying, there are certain whales that you're not going to see in some oceans, and what leads them to certain parts of the world?
Well, whales, like so many other animals, go where the food is, right? Like they follow their foraging behaviors. We have North Atlantic right whales that eat these copepods, which are these like tiny shrimp-like things. They are always following copepods. And then we have other whales that eat fish, so they're always following fish. And of course, I think warming waters play, or water temperature for that matter, plays a role in where whales go. But yeah, I think there's something called like the foraging theory. I'm getting it wrong. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's basically that like animals follow their food. That's kind of where that's where they go. That's where they are.
I mean, that makes sense because that's what we do too, right?
It's true. It's true.
And Tracy, because you work with beluga whales who are not found off the coast of New England, but people can find them at Mystic Aquarium in Mystic, Connecticut. Tell us a little bit about them. Where do wild belugas live and what are they like?
Belugas live in the Arctic and the subarctic waters. So off the coast of Canada, Greenland, Russia, there's a small population in Norway, and right here in the United States, right off the coast of Alaska.
Wow.
Belugas are, I think, one of the unique the most incredible whales, one of my favorites, and it's because they're so unique and so different. So, for example, belugas are born a dark gray, but then they turn white as they get older. We were talking about vocalizations earlier on the show, and I think they're one of the most vocal whales that we have. In fact, they were coined the term canaries of the sea by fishermen because of all the shrills and whistles and different sounds that they emit. They also lack a dorsal fin. So, unlike other whales, they don't have a dorsal fin. They have what's called a dorsal ridge. And they also have a flexible neck, so they can turn their head around underwater, unlike other whales. And then finally, they have this funny jiggle. It looks like I describe it as a marshmallow top, which they can move around, and it's really how they focus their echolocation. But it looks like this squishy marshmallow where they can change their facial expressions, for example. So they're so unique in so many different ways.
That's funny. I never really thought about turning your head in the water. Obviously, since I am not a water species, but that's a fun fact for everyone learning today. And earlier, Eve talked about how right whales are endangered. Is this the same for belugas? Are they an endangered species, Tracy? And how has climate change impacting their chances of survival?
Sure. Well, belugas as a whole are doing okay. However, there are small subpopulations of belugas that are geographically and genetically isolated that are endangered. And one of those is right here in the United States. The Cook Inlet beluga population is less than 300 endangered, and we're doing all we can to try to understand what's happening with these whales. Climate change, in terms of climate change, the Arctic is ground zero for climate change. And I go to the Arctic every summer and I've seen the changes, the rapid changes myself. It's yet to be determined how belugas will be affected by climate change. But again, it's all the usual. With the loss of sea ice, they're more vulnerable to man. So whether it be shipping traffic, whether it be oil exploration or oil spills, pollution, sound in the ocean, shifts in prey, or new predators in the area. So more killer whales in the area that not necessarily were there before. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt. But for the most part, you can imagine for an Arctic species, this is rapid change.
Well, and Eve, maybe this might be related, but last year you reported that there were 3 dead whales, 2 humpbacks, and 1 minke that washed ashore on the coastline between Plymouth and Wellfleet in just under a week. What factors led to that? Did you know?
Yeah, with those 3, it's actually kind of a perfect tale of what we see in the broader population and why we see these deaths. With those 3, we saw 2 humpbacks and 1 minke and a wink, which was unusual but not unexpected, was how researchers kind of posed it to me. The minke was killed by infectious disease. We see more and more minke whales killed by infectious disease. Scientists are still kind of trying to make sense of that. One of the whales, the humpback, was killed with a head-on collision with a boat. That is the leading cause of death for North Atlantic right whales, and it's up there. It's high for humpbacks as well. And then the other humpback actually had an entanglement around its body, its rope or fishing gear. It's not clear whether that is what killed the whale. I think we're still waiting on final results from a necropsy, which is like an autopsy for an animal. But those are kind of the 3 main killers that we see for a bunch of whale species. And the human interaction specifically, the entanglements and the so-called vessel strikes or boat collisions are really responsible for taking out so many whales.
Well, and I know a lot of times part of the conversation, too, is environmental factors. And President Donald Trump has signed executive orders to shut down offshore wind projects, which you mentioned earlier a little bit. And he said one of the reasons for this action is that wind turbines are driving whales, quote, batty. What do we know about this? Is this true?
Batty is not a scientific term, so it's hard to kind of engage in that completely. But what I think that President Trump is referring to is there are concerns about how offshore wind construction, because that's mainly where we are at this point, is the construction phase of offshore wind farms, how noise during construction can affect whales. Because whales do really rely on underwater sound in a lot of ways for navigating where they're going, for communicating with each other, for foraging, all kinds of things. But we actually know a pretty good deal about how whales hear and what they hear and how they're engaging so far with offshore wind construction. So first of all, offshore wind, to build these farms, two different kinds of noise are mainly created. One is through these like underwater surveys, and that NOAA, our kind of governing body of weather and ocean in this country, has found that those surveys create no problems for whales. Like that is not in their hearing range, that shouldn't affect them, that hasn't affected them, that will not affect them. So NOAA has kind of ruled that out. Pile driving, on the other hand, which is needed to like build the massive foundations for offshore wind turbines, is incredibly loud and could be disruptive for whales. So scientists have already really jumped in to study that. That research is still ongoing, but one compelling study so far came from a researcher out of Duke who I've been in touch with for the last several years. He studied South Fork wind off of New York. He went there with a bunch of tags and was able to tag fin whales. I should have added them. They're the other kind of New England whale species, and sei whales. That's the fifth and final, mainly. But he was able to tag them and see, what happens when there's pile driving. Do these whales get seriously affected? And he found basically nothing. Like they kind of move out of the way when there's loud pile driving, which is to be expected. That's kind of what whales do. They can be scaredy cats sometimes. North Atlantic right whales are kind of like famously scaredy cats in some ways. They can be very like shifty when something comes into their area, which is hard sometimes for researchers. But yeah, they kind of moved out of the way and then they came back into the area. And that is what we've seen so far. There is no research out there that I have found, that I've talked to with experts about in many, many hours of conversation, that shows that right whales any whales are doing anything close to showing batty behavior when it comes to offshore wind.
Right. And then based on your reporting, it sounds like researchers are also working really closely with the offshore wind companies to make sure that they have as little, not damage, but as little impact, I think, as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And federal regulators. But so kind of that three-pronged team that's working together has figured out like, okay, we have to do pile driving to get these, foundations driven into the, seafloor. But what is done is no pile driving happens when whales are migrating through an area, both seasonally. So pile driving can only happen in seasons when whales are in like Maine or Florida. They're very far away for the most part. When there is a whale that sometimes wanders into the area, again, these are wild animals. They come into unexpected areas sometimes. Offshore wind developers have like acoustic underwater monitoring. They have human observers. They have all kinds of systems in place to make sure that if a whale were to wander in, that's it. Pile driving is done for the day. It will not happen. They're even testing, this is kind of interesting to me. They're basically like these offshore wind developers are putting hoses on the seafloor, and they are like perforated. There are these holes in these hoses, and they're able to blow bubbles up into the ocean, and it creates this what's called a bubble curtain. And so that bubble curtain is designed to absorb sound coming from pile driving, and it's so far been shown to work. Vineyard Wind off of Martha's Vineyard, which is close to me here, they have been using it, and I think we'll see probably more of that.
Yeah, and I mean, I find it to be really interesting too, learning that there's actually very minimal impact with such large projects. And Tracy, are you aware if there's are there any forms of noise that impact the beluga whale population in the Arctic? Oh, Tracy, did we lose you? We might have lost Tracy. That's okay. Eve, I'm going to come back to you real quick too, because you also reported on the slow zones along the East Coast, which was put into place to protect endangered whales, but that has been withdrawn. So can you remind us, what are slow zones and what impact could this have on whales?
Yeah, well, as I said, one of the leading causes of death for whales on the eastern seaboard in particular are collisions with boats. So researchers have really tried to figure out how do we tackle that. And there's research specifically, I'm thinking of some from the New England Aquarium, that shows that if you slow down boats, you can reduce the chance that a boat will hit a whale. So the federal government, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, put forward this plan that would have required boats 35 feet or longer to travel at no more than 10 knots, which is kind of like 10 miles per hour, during certain times of the year in very particular areas up and down the eastern seaboard where we know whales like to gather. So locally to me, that's like Vineyard Sound, Nantucket Sound, but areas all over the East Coast. That proposal kind of fell apart, did fall apart, in fact. Basically, in a document filed, I want to call it last month, officials with NOAA said that they were withdrawing their plan because they received 90,000 public comments, many of which included requests for more public engagement from people who said, you know, if you slow down these boats, you're including ferries in there. And when we have island communities that rely on ferries, that's a problem. Or when we have, you know, a massive shipping industry that like helps us get our, you know, toilet paper into this country, you know, and all kinds of things on boats. That's a problem. So yeah, this slow zone did not go through, to the chagrin of whale conservationists.
Well, it's so amazing to learn how intricate these are all connected, sort of human living and whale living. And Tracy, hopefully we have you back here with us.
Yes, I'm back.
Great. Welcome back. And we'd love to hear more about your research projects at Mystic, because you're conducting a lot of studies to better understand the beluga whales and the threats to their survival. Can you tell us more about these projects?
Absolutely. You know, having the belugas in our care gives us an opportunity to learn as much as we can about the whales. And it offers us a unique opportunity in that we have a controlled environment. So we know all about their water chemistry, we know the water temperature, we know the food that they're eating, we know how much, we know where it comes from, and we know their health history. So we take away all those confounding variables that we might not know if we just studied the animals in the wild. In addition, we're able to train our whales. So through positive reinforcement, they participate in their own health care, and they also participate in providing us research or biological samples. So we can take their blood, we can take their breath, we can take their saliva, and develop all kinds of tests to assess their health. And for example, one of those is just, we know the so when we can take their blood and we know all their blood parameters, and then we're actually sampling whales in the wild. So we're working with collaborators to capture whales, put satellite transmitters on them, take their blood, and then release them back into the wild. And so we can compare the values of the wild animals with the values that we're getting from healthy whales at the aquarium. Some of the other things we're studying is the breath. So we've ground truth everything we can measure from breath, from identifying their sex, to identifying their nutrition, their immune status, their stress status. And so we hope to transition that to sample breath from wild whales. And we can do that with drones, or we can do that using a pole from a boat. And we hope to move that to wild whales this summer up in Churchill, Manitoba. And another one is just studying their body condition. You know, wildlife biologists in the St. Lawrence and Cook Inlet are using photogrammetry. And all that is really taking photographs from a certain height from a drone and inferring, making measurements and doing all these mathematical calculations to look at their body condition. And so our whales are trained to swim under a camera. We take a series of photographs, but then we actually weigh them. We actually measure their girth and their length, and we send all these values to the wildlife biologists, who then can ground truth all the data that they're getting on the wild animals. And then finally, we also do animals, we study them in the wild. So for example, with collaborators, we're actually able to get a remote skin biopsy. And we have remote skin biopsies from Cook Inlet belugas and St. Lawrence belugas, which are endangered, but we also have them from stocks that are stable, such as the Chukchi Sea and Bristol Bay. And we're looking for the genes that are differentially expressed in those endangered animals. And we just published the work on the Chukchi Sea and the Bristol Bay whales in Frontiers. And now we're going ahead and adding the findings from the endangered whales. So really exciting research. And hopefully this will help shed some light on the endangered animals.
Well, it is exciting, and we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk more about the research. And really quickly here, as you're doing your research, part of the aquarium's mission is also to educate the public. So can you talk about how does this mission factor into your work, into your research that you do at the aquarium?
Yeah, education is so important. We're really training the next generation of scientists, and we have programs starting in elementary school going all the way up to postdoctoral. So we take graduate students. We have a National Science Foundation funded research experiences for undergrads. We're the only aquarium that has one, where students can get a science-based, hands-on experience in research and determine if they want to go into research or conservation or education. And we also bring Alaska Native youth. They help us in the field collect samples from the whales, but then they come to the aquarium and participate with our Native American youth on understanding science and the whales. And then they also exchange culture. So it's really a wonderful basis to get kids excited about science when they see the animals, and hope will foster the next generation.
Absolutely. And I want to end with Eve here. What are you working on next? What should we expect, and what are you excited about?
Gosh, I mean, I think that so much of my work more and more is pointing towards kind of the intersection between whales, offshore wind, and fishermen. I think that that is really the direction, and that excludes a lot of the really interesting science that researchers are working on. Like Tracy, I've been on one of these boats that kind of watches researchers take a drone and hover over a whale to collect the breath of a whale. It's one of the most magical experiences of my life. So there's a lot of interesting research, but I think that in this moment where we have President Trump, who we know is very anti-offshore wind, and increasingly I have seen kind of this interesting shift locally on Cape Cod, and I think in other places on the East Coast as well, where communities have started to turn their backs against offshore wind. I think people are really excited about it. There's a lot of promises of jobs and clean energy and affordability and fighting climate change. And the tide has shifted, even in people who were maybe pro-offshore wind before. And then whales are right in the crosshairs because they're kind of used sometimes in earnest and sometimes as kind of pawns in the fight to be right in the middle as an argument for or against offshore wind. Sometimes people say, in order to protect these whales, we have to get rid of offshore wind because we're building, we're industrializing the ocean. And to be clear, some of the people who say that are longtime right whale or whale researchers. They are concerned. They know that this is kind of a giant live experiment that we are embarking on. At the same time, we know that one of the largest threats, I should have said it earlier, to whales is climate change. Warming waters are shifting their food. It's shifting what's available to them. It's shifting where they go, sometimes moving whales into unprotected waters. And we know that offshore wind is one of our greatest hopes to drive down fossil fuel emissions in the country and in the world. I mean, I pulled it up actually because I thought I might mention it today. I'll just read it to you. The Department of Energy, they wanted to understand how much carbon emissions do offshore wind farms actually produce. And they found that they emit about 40 times less carbon emissions than natural gas to produce the same amount of energy, about 90 times less than coal. One study found that the carbon and energy expended over the lifespan of an offshore wind turbine was paid back within the first 6 to 17 months of it operating. So there are all of these kinds of competing ideas that I think are fascinating, and there actually are no simple answers, which kind of keeps me coming back to it and looking forward to what I'll be covering.
Well, and obviously we'll have to have you come back and give us an update on what's going on there. And thank you so much for sharing your sort of magical whale moments with us. You've been listening to Eve Zukoff, who's a climate and environment reporter for CAI. Eve, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And you are also listening to Dr. Tracy Romano, who's the Chief Scientist and Vice President of Research at Mystic Aquarium. Tracy, appreciate you sharing your whale stories with us as well.
Thank you.
Coming up, learn about how scientists are using AI technology to decode the language of Connecticut's state animal, the sperm whale. Join the conversation. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
It's all true, I swear by my tattoo. There's no sea monster big enough to ever frighten me. Got a whale of a tale to tell you, lads, a whale of a tale or two, about the flatfish fish and the girls I've loved on nights like this with the moon above. Whale of a tale and it's all true, I swear by my tattoo.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. For scientists working on Project CETI, the driving question is, what would it mean to understand what whales are saying? CETI stands for Cetacean Translation Initiative. The CETI team is using AI technology to understand the communication of sperm whales. We're joined now by Gasper Begush, who's the U.S. Berkeley linguistics professor and also linguist for Project CETI. Gasper, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
And we're also joined by Catherine Hulick, who's a freelance science journalist for Science News Explorers. Catherine, appreciate you coming on as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And listeners, let us know if you have any whale questions, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Gasper, where does the research for Project CETI take place, and what role do you play in the process?
Yeah, so Project CETI is a really large interdisciplinary effort to listen to and understand sperm whales. And we have a station in Dominica in the Caribbean. And the project includes really fascinating scientists, cryptographers, computer scientists, biologists, obviously, and linguists. I'm the linguistic lead there. And linguists usually study human language, but we've been studying human language for a very long time, and we've learned a lot. We've we came up with the methodology to how to understand and identify the building pieces of language, right? So we developed experimental techniques to better understand how human babies learn language very fast, very early on. And so we're using those 200-year-old precious knowledge to try to listen to and understand whales and apply the knowledge of linguistics on whales. And we're also, in my lab, I'm building models of human language using AI, and we're using some of those same models to try to understand what is meaningful and what is important in this complex communication system.
Well, I'm so excited to learn more about what you're researching and how all that works. But what drew you to researching whales in the first place?
Well, I was also always interested in animals. I think linguists for the longest were mostly focused on human language, as I mentioned. But I don't think you can really study human language until you realize there's so many complex communications out there in the animal kingdom. And sperm whales are interesting for all sorts of reasons, but their communication system is so fascinating. They have these clicks that they exchange in what appear conversations, and unlike some other species where vocalization happens for mating, sperm whales use those vocalizations before they hunt and while they're socializing. So it appears that there's something meaningful there in that communication system in terms of referential meaning, and it's really quite interesting the way they communicate. And so that, as a linguist, of course, you're immediately drawn into this vocalizations, and you want to learn more, and you want to understand them, and you want to figure out what the building pieces are.
Well, and Catherine, how did you get involved with reporting on Project CETI?
Well, I found out about CETI when the project first started a couple years ago. And if you were thinking CETI, SETI, when we first started talking about this, I mean, that's not an accident. They named it CETI on purpose because SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And CETI is kind of the same thing, but here on Earth.
I love
So
that connection, and I was going to ask you to clarify that.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I mean, I've always been fascinated by languages, also like Gasper, and just the idea that we could learn another species' language, I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And so I really wanted to learn more. And so I've kind of been following the project closely all along and have written about it several times and have spoken with Gasper as well several times. So I love the work that he's doing.
And you also often report on artificial intelligence, but what was it
Yes.
about this particular project that piqued your interest?
Well, I just love this application of artificial intelligence because, like any technology, it's how you use it that matters. And to me, this is just a really wonderful and positive use of AI. We're using this tool to kind of try to understand this other intelligence, and we're doing it. At least I know that the CETI team is doing it to help us better protect whales, which is what you were talking about in the first part of the show. Like, if we could just ask the whales what they want or what they need, like, wouldn't that be amazing?
I would love that.
Or, I mean, even if we can't directly ask them, if we can just understand better what they're talking about and what they care about, because I mean, right now, SETI is pretty early on in its work, and most of what it's doing right now is just collecting data. They're measuring these whales in so many different fascinating ways, using drones, using like these swimming fish-like robots. They're using these like suction cups, and they're doing this because you need to know the context of when these whales are communicating. So they're just trying to learn as much as they can about what's going on among these whales when they're making these sounds, and that could help us get closer to some sort of meaning.
Well, and right on point with us, we have Jackie, who's calling from West Hartford, who has a question. I have this question too, about language and dialect within the whale community. Jackie, you're on the air.
Hi there. Yes, so I am curious about different dialects, and if whales, like in New England, it's sometimes difficult to understand people in Maine. Their language. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's difficult for us to maybe understand different language or the same language with people in the Deep South. I'm wondering if that's the same with whales within pods, within species, within different parts of the world.
Thank you so much for that question, Jackie Gasper. I've seen you laughing, nodding, and smiling.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the coolest thing. Actually, the interesting thing is that the field of social linguistics that studies how humans use language to express social identity. One of the main study sites was Martha's Vineyard, and Bill LeBeau started that study showing that the people on the island, how they use their dialect in these social interactions with non-islanders. And yes, absolutely, sperm whales do that as well, another species. While I'm mostly focusing on Dominica sperm whales and our family, EC1, we're also now looking into, for example, Galapagos whales, and they have different identity markers. So they express their clan identity with different coda types. So they put clicks together, and the timing in which they put the clicks together differs across the ocean. And the interesting thing that our biologist Shane Garrow and others published a couple of years ago is that they use those markers of identity more when they bump into where groups bump into each other more. So in areas of the ocean where sperm whales interact with other clans, they amplify the use of their social markers in their dialects. So that's really fascinating. So not only they have the dialects, they also use them in similar ways as humans, because we all know sometimes if you really want to signal to somebody that you're from some area, you will just amplify, for example, some feature from a language, say y'all, for example, which is a marker maybe of certain parts of the U.S.
I mean, when I went to school, I was told that I say dude a lot, but I'm also like, dude, I'm from California, so of course I'm going to use dude. Yes, people love reminding me of that, and that's totally okay. But it is so fascinating to hear that I don't want to say humanizing, but the fact that whales do that too, and we do that on a daily basis or when we're socializing. So I would love to learn more about, can you get personalities of sperm whales? What are they like? Do they each have their own unique dispositions?
Yeah, that's a great thing. We're on the field. I'm with biologists, and I barely see the whale. Well, the biologist already knows the name of the whale by fin. Usually, you identify them by fin. Um, it's really difficult to say it. So there's a lot we don't know about sperm whales, and they're very difficult to study because they dive for like a mile deep. They're gone for 45 minutes, and you're basically when they come back up and so breathe, exchange some vocalizations, you have a very short time to observe them. But the cool thing is that now we know this family we've been working on with for so long. We pretty much know them. I know whales by name. At home, when I analyze their data, there's Pinchy, there's Fork, there's Atwood. They have these funny names, and some of them seem very chatty. And the cool thing about sperm whales is that they live in matrilineal societies. So grandmas are with mothers and daughters and young males. And these grandmas are my favorite because they seem to be very chatty. My favorite is Pinchy. It's where I spend most of my research on, and she's very chatty. She has many different vocal patterns that we've been observing. And and on the other hand, right, it's sperm whales have these large bodies, and they have much less mimics. They cannot, raise their brow as much. They don't have as much facial expressions as maybe some other species have. So all you basically are getting are these vocalizations, and so yes, to some degree, I think they are personalities, and I love these grandmas. The sperm whales also live for like probably up to 80 years. There's a lot we don't know still, but the grandmas are around the societies, and they're very chatty, and I love listening to them and trying to understand them.
Well, I'm obsessed with Grandma Pinchy right now, so I would have to look into that. And so, as you've been sharing with us, a sperm whale song is really unique. And when we imagine whale sounds, we typically think of this. So I want to ask both Gasper and Catherine here, because sperm whales sound a bit more like this, right? And do you know why they communicate this way?
So I think that's evolution. Hard to say, but the song is from humpbacks,
Yes.
and our sperm whales don't sing at all. They don't even whistle. So a lot of dolphins, beluga whales, the canaries of the sea we've heard, they have all sorts of vocalizations, and sperm whales literally just click. Why this is an interesting question. So they use those clicks for echolocation. So they basically see with their sounds in a way, because the ocean, they dive really deep. These are really deep divers, like a mile deep, and it's dark under certain 700 meters, and so they see with sound, and then they also probably adapted to use those clicks to communicate and transmit social meaning. I don't know, Catherine maybe has different view.
Yeah, and I think that one reason SETI chose sperm whales was because of the clicks, because it's more of on its surface, it seems like a simpler communication system than these songs. Like it seems like it sounds almost like Morse code. Like it seems like something we should be able to at least quantify in a way that's easier than, a really complex, multi-layered song. So that's one, and I think it's a lot more complicated than we thought, as
Right.
Kasper knows from his work. But it does, on its surface, seem like something that we have a hope of decoding, and that's one reason why those whales were chosen for this kind of in-depth research.
Well, as we're chatting, I should have thought ahead and wrote a whole intro based on clicks and have you guys decode it for us and do the intro for the show today. And just really quickly here, Catherine, before we go to break, I'm also interested to hear, what is it about those sounds that AI technology can help scientists decipher what whales are saying? You know, is using AI technology more effective than using human ears, or is like a mix of the two?
Yeah, well, I mean, humans have done such amazing work in like the first steps of this. Like they have discovered so much about sperm whale codas, which is their name for like the bursts of clicks that they make. And what AI really does is it kind of speeds things up. It makes things faster and easier. Like it can automatically tag all this data that's being collected. Like it used to take people hours upon hours to go through these recordings and just say, when does the whale start talking? When does it stop talking? You know, which whale is this? And AI can do a lot of that automatically. Also, it does find patterns that people don't notice. And Gasper's done some really fascinating work on this that, you know, people have discovered a lot of different ways that these codas, like, you know, the number of clicks or the timing of the clicks, but there's more to it than that human ears don't really pick out. And AI, because it excels at recognizing patterns in data. That's what it does. And it can find patterns that we don't notice.
You've been listening to Catherine Hulick, who's a freelance science journalist for Science News Explorers, and Gasper Begush, who's the associate professor of linguistics at UC Berkeley. After the break, we'll explore why speaking whale could help with conservation efforts. Join the conversation. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're diving deep into the world of Connecticut's state animal, the sperm whale, and taking a look at how scientists are using AI technology to understand what they're saying. Still with us is Gasper Begush from UC Berkeley and also Catherine Hulick, who's a freelance science journalist. So I want to jump straight back into the waters with you guys to talk about these whales. Gasper, I'm going to start with you here. Why is there an effort to understand the language of sperm whales? You know, are there ways which understanding the whales could help them or maybe help us?
I think it can help us tremendously. I think learning more about this complex species that is so wonderful in so many ways, and you know, has the largest brain, has extremely complex societies where children, you know, kids live with the families for 6 years, and you know, sometimes mother breastfeed for up to 13 years, and they have this really interesting social lives and very interesting worlds. And you know, underwater, their world is so different and so fascinating. And so there are these amazing creatures, and learning about them and their intelligence and their communication. What are they talking about? I think it can really help us reorient ourselves, like our, you know, humanity's position in the world. Like how are we? How maybe not as special we are. So that's first thing. I think it can help us. I think learning about them can really help the humanity. It can also help them as well. You know, learning more about their communication system will give us answers about what is actually, how noise actually interferes with their daily lives. And that, I think, is huge. I think we heard about shipping hits as the main leading cause of deaths, but I think shipping noise is also very problematic for the communication system. And the more we learn about their clicks and how their spectral properties work, the better we will be at protecting them. And so there's a lot of things we are doing in that regard. We're partnering with the Moth team at the NYU School of Law to basically build a legal framework for protection. Dominica created the first ever sperm whale preserve off the coast of Dominica. There's the only of this kind for specifically sperm whales. We're also building, like, our theory team worked on basically a framework which will allow us to try, you know, understand the communication system without intervention, just by listening. And that's huge, right? We do not want to disturb these animals at all. So I think this gentle approach to research, a non-invasive approach to research is important. And we're learning about the noise impacts and better protecting the whales. But I think we're also learning about our humanity and our relationship to nature. And I think learning about these creatures is similar to what Roger Payne did in the 60s, where it really, really changed the perspective of whales forever, basically.
We've got a couple of minutes here, but Catherine, I want to get to you building on what Gasper just shared with us in terms of learning about humanity, but also recognizing that we have impacts on whales, including boating accidents and fishing entanglements. So I wonder if this moral dilemma is a debate that you're seeing play out in the sphere of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and actually, I did want to note that Gasper's work inspired a book that I've written for kids, The UFO Files, which is a science fiction story about a UFO landing on Earth and investigators using the same techniques that Gasper's team is using to try to establish communication with these visitors. And my book does wrestle with some of those themes of whenever you're having some encounter with the unknown, there is a chance for misunderstandings and harm, even unintentional harm. So, I mean, there is some concern, that do the whales really want us surveilling them constantly to learn their language? Would they rather be left alone? So right. I know the team is very aware of that and is taking a lot of pains to make sure that their work is not disturbing the whales or bothering them, because that's not what they want to do. And I mean, we may be doing this with the best of intentions, but we have to make sure that we respect the whales' wishes as well, and whatever they are. And that's what we're trying to figure out.
Well, I want to get to some final thoughts from both of you. Gasper, we'll go with you first. Why is it important that we protect these species, and any final thoughts you have for our listeners?
I think there are a couple of, so there's so many reasons, but I think as humans, we're very curious, and they are very curious as well. The whales are very curious as well. And I think one is just curiosity of this wonderful intelligence that lives in a completely different world. And what can we learn from that? We have elephants, we have chimpanzees, we have all sorts of amazing animals. With them, we share basically a lot of the world, right? We have trees, we have ground, we have the sky, we have the air. None of those concepts exist in sperm whales, right? It's sea. It's like they're surfacer, not divers, right? They live in this vast ocean where there's no ground in that same way. Gravity works, in a different way in water in some ways. So I think just learning from them, because they're so different and yet so similar, is one of the many reasons why we need to take good care of them.
And Catherine, about 30 seconds here, because you're in both the AI world and sort of the whale world. Any thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners that you want to leave with them today?
Well, yeah, I mean, just what Gasper was just saying, there's so many words that are common to all human languages, like sit and drink and fire, that wouldn't make any sense to these whales. They don't actually drink. They get their water from the fish they eat, They don't really have homes in the way we do. They travel constantly. So I think just trying to understand this totally different way of living in the world and being, just being an intelligent creature in the world, I think can really make us better understand ourselves too, and respect nature more.
Well, thank you so much for that. You've been listening to Catherine Hulick, who's a freelance science journalist for Science News Explores, and author of the UFO Files, Notes on an Alien Encounter, which comes out this summer. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And you're also listening to Gasper Begush, who's a UC Berkeley linguistics professor and linguist for Project CETI. Gasper, we really appreciate your time today as well.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Nguyen. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for listening, and stay curious, everyone.
We'll kiss just as before. Happy we'll be beyond the sea.